There was a time when Harley Davidson meant something money could not buy. You worked for it, waited for it, and when you finally got it, the brand felt like it stood with you. That is what made it special. But somewhere along the line, that understanding started to fade. Harley kept asking for loyalty while slowly giving less in return. Prices climbed, priorities changed, and the bond riders, once trusted, started to feel different. In this video, we are breaking down how Harley Davidson betrayed its own riders and why that word is starting to feel earned. Stay with me until the end, because the truth is deeper than most people think. Harley used to mean something money couldn't buy. There was a time when owning a Harley meant more than owning a motorcycle. It meant you had reached something that could not be faked. A rider earned that machine through years of work, years of waiting and wanting. The badge on the tank carried road miles, not just money. It meant long Saturdays in the garage, early starts before sunrise, and the kind of pride that came from riding a machine with weight, sound, and presence. For a lot of American riders, Harley was not a purchase. It was a destination. That is why the old bond mattered so much. Harley stood for brotherhood without needing to explain it. Factory workers, truck drivers, mechanics, veterans, and small business owners all saw something of themselves in the brand. A Harley was blue-collar ambition with chrome on it. It was tough, imperfect, proud, and unmistakably American. By 2006, Harley held roughly 49.3% of the heavyweight market in the United States. And that dominance came from emotional gravity as much as sales. The company was selling belonging. The later wound cuts so deep because the foundation was real. A weak brand cannot betray anyone this deeply. Only a brand that once meant something bigger than metal can pull that off. The first crack usually appears when a company forgets that loyalty is still something it has to earn. The badge got strong enough to make Harley arrogant. Success can sharpen a company, but it can also make it lazy in dangerous ways. Harley reached a point where the badge itself began doing work the motorcycles used to do. Demand was strong, waiting lists felt normal, dealerships looked powerful, and the company started living inside its own legend. Once that happens, management can begin believing that the customer is locked in for life. The machine still matters, but not with the same urgency. The logo starts carrying the burden alone. That kind of dominance changes the way decisions get made. When a brand spends years as the cultural center of heavyweight American motorcycling, confidence can quietly harden into entitlement. Harley did not need to beg for attention. It did not need to explain why it mattered. It already had the strongest symbol, the deepest roots, and the loudest presence at bike nights, rallies, and highway stops across the country. The danger is simple. A company can start assuming that affection is permanent, even when the world around it is changing. Riders do not always notice that shift right away. At first, the pride still feels the same. The engine note still means something. The image still carries force. Then, the attitude behind the scenes starts drifting. Once a company believes the badge can carry almost anything, the engineering is usually the next place where urgency begins to fade fast. If you've been riding long enough to see these changes firsthand, hit like, subscribe for more straight talk, and share your perspective below. Heritage became a cover for standing still. Tradition has real value in motorcycles. Older riders understand that better than anyone. Not every machine needs to chase the newest trend, and not every improvement has to come wrapped in a glossy slogan. Harley's strength was never supposed to be sterile perfection. It was supposed to be character with substance behind it. That is why the slow drift into complacency felt so wrong. The company kept presenting heritage as if heritage alone could answer every criticism. For years, riders accepted heat, vibration, and old-school roughness because those traits were tied to identity. A Harley was supposed to feel alive beneath you. It was supposed to have pulse, sound, and mechanical honesty. The problem came when that defense began covering too much ground. Competitors kept refining comfort, braking, cooling, and long-haul usability, while Harley often leaned harder on nostalgia. Character became the answer to questions that should have been answered with engineering. The gap was not always dramatic at first, but experienced riders could feel it. They felt it in traffic, on trips, and after miles. That is where the myth began to crack. Heritage works when it protects something real. It becomes dangerous when it starts protecting delay. Riders can live with quirks for years and stay loyal. Respect gets thinner once the machine starts asking for more patience than it is giving back, especially after decades of faithful ownership. Before we go further, if you care about riding with gear that actually works in the real world, check the description. The working rider stopped being the ideal customer. The deepest sting came when longtime riders began realizing the brand no longer seemed built around them. Harley had been carried for generations by men who worked with their hands, saved carefully, and bought motorcycles as a serious milestone. These were not casual lifestyle shoppers. They were riders who put real miles on touring machines, kept old bikes running, and treated the local dealer like part clubhouse, part supply post, part second home. That rider gave Harley its backbone. Over time, the center of gravity started moving away from him. The company's direction made it harder to ignore who the preferred buyer seemed to be. Someone with a thicker wallet, higher tolerance for inflated pricing, and less attachment to the older handshake between brand and rider. Harley leaned harder into higher-margin touring and custom machines, even as demand softened and the customer base aged. That may look sensible in a boardroom. On the rider side of the counter, it feels like a message. It says the old backbone is no longer the concern. That is where betrayal stops feeling abstract. It lands in the wallet, yes, but it also lands in identity. A brand once seen as the mount of the working American rider began looking more like a product arranged for wealthier comfort. From there, the business started giving off a different smell, and long-time riders could sense the air changing. Harley's own strategy started saying the quiet part out loud. The real shift stopped sounding like rumor once Harley began describing itself in colder, clearer terms. On its own strategy page, the company says it will invest in strengthening and growing its leadership in its strongest, most profitable motorcycle segments: touring, large cruiser, and trike. That sentence matters because it tells riders exactly where the center of gravity moved. Harley no longer talks like a broad rider culture first. It talks like a company sorting the lineup by yield, margin, and return. That may please investors, but riders hear something else in that language. They hear a brand becoming narrower, more selective, and more willing to build around the safest profit pools, instead of the wider riding world that once made Harley feel larger than business. The old magic lived in the idea that the company served a whole brotherhood. The newer language sounds more like management, drawing circles around the customers it wants to keep closest. It also reveals something deeper. Harley was no longer simply asking what kind of motorcycles should define the road. It was asking which categories could defend profit with the least uncertainty. That is a cleaner, corporate sentence than most riders ever wanted to hear from this company. Once a company starts defining itself by profit buckets, the next question almost asks itself, who got rewarded first? Wall Street was rewarded faster than riders were. The answer did not take long to surface. In 2024, Harley announced a plan to repurchase $1 billion of its shares through 2026. That is not a tiny bookkeeping move. That is a loud signal about what still mattered enough to fund. The frustration for longtime riders is not that buybacks exist. It is when buybacks arrive while the rider side of the relationship already feels thinner, pricier, and less certain than it used to. A company that can find room to support its stock can also invite hard questions about why so many owners feel value slipping, trust eroding, and accessibility drifting farther out of reach. That is where financial logic starts turning emotional. Riders begin wondering whether loyalty was milked while capital was steered toward optics that played better in the market than they did in the garage. Numbers alone do not offend people. Priorities do. When a rider sees premium pricing, hears years of talk about brand strength, and then learns the company found room for a giant repurchase plan, the meaning changes. The signal becomes painfully simple. Somebody important was still being looked after. Once shareholder thinking moves to the front of the parade, it never stays trapped in board papers for long. It starts changing what the rider sees on the showroom floor. The dealership lost its old-world feel. For older Harley owners, the local dealership was never just retail. It was where parts talk happened, where service stories got traded, where coffee stretched into an hour, and where a rider could feel known before he felt sold to. That atmosphere carried real value, even if it never showed up on a balance sheet. As Harley leaned harder into premium, positioning and higher margin focus, the tone of the retail experience inevitably started changing too. The space began feeling more managed, more curated, and more guided by brand presentation than by rider familiarity. Not every dealer changed in the same way, and not every old habit vanished, but the emotional texture shifted enough for longtime customers to notice. What once felt like a gathering place increasingly risked feeling like a controlled retail environment, designed to protect margins and presentation first. The handshake feel started giving ground to a polished sales feel. Even the air can feel different when conversation no longer leads the room. That loss is hard to quantify, yet easy for riders to recognize the moment they walk inside. That kind of change is subtle, until it is not. A rider may not complain about it on day one, but he feels the temperature difference almost immediately. A colder showroom could still have been endured if the motorcycles themselves kept, delivering unquestioned peace of mind. Premium money stopped buying premium trust. That is where the corporate story became personal. Harley riders can live with flaws. They always have. They understand that character sometimes comes with heat, vibration, and mechanical personality. What they do not accept easily is recurring doubt at premium money. Once prices climb high enough, confidence becomes part of what the rider believes he bought. If the ownership experience starts feeling more fragile than the price tag suggests, the disappointment lands harder than an ordinary product gripe. It feels like the company assumed the badge would carry the trust automatically. That is why older complaints about weak points on certain eras never fully disappear from the conversation. They are not just technical memories, they are emotional evidence. They remind riders of moments when patience was asked for too often, and certainty arrived too rarely. Premium brands do not merely sell metal, paint, and displacement. They sell reassurance. They sell the feeling that the bike will justify the sacrifice it took to bring it home. For riders who saved hard and expected peace, uncertainty feels almost insulting. When that reassurance thins out, the rider starts questioning the entire bargain. Once enough owners begin feeling that mismatch in their bones, the market eventually stops pretending not to notice. The sales slump made the damage visible. Sooner or later, every betrayal shows up in the numbers. Harley's did. In 2025, global motorcycle shipments fell 16%, while Harley Davidson Motor Company revenue dropped 13%. Those figures matter because they move the story out of emotion and into evidence. Riders can argue over image, styling, and tradition all day long, but shipments and revenue tell a colder truth. They show what happens when confidence softens, when hesitation grows, and when buyers stop treating the badge like an automatic yes. A company can blame market headwinds, high borrowing costs, tariffs, and cautious spending, and some of that is real. Still, those pressures hit hardest when the bond underneath is already fraying. Strong loyalty can carry a brand through rough weather. A weaker bond cannot. That is why these declines matter so much. They suggest the problem was not just economics. It was erosion. The market was no longer covering up what riders had been feeling for years. Dealers can move units with incentives, and corporate can point to outside pressure. But the slide still reveals a hard truth. Confidence was no longer deep enough to shield the brand. Once the bond weakens beneath the numbers, the next fracture usually shows up in the future customer. The fall was measurable, visible, and impossible to hide behind mythology forever. It was no accident. Harley never built a real bridge to the next generation. A great motorcycle brand does more than serve the riders who already love it. It keeps renewing itself without losing its soul. Harley struggled there for years. Reuters reported that the company has had trouble appealing to younger riders while leaning on higher-margin products and an aging customer base. That point cuts deeper than a trendy marketing complaint. It raises a cultural question. Was Harley still building a future, or simply harvesting the loyalty of riders who came of age in stronger years? Older owners can keep a brand alive for a long time, but no company can coast forever on memory alone. There has to be a believable handoff. There has to be a younger rider who sees something living in the brand, not just something famous. Harley never fully solved that problem. It could still inspire respect, but it struggled to feel reachable, current, and naturally desirable to the next wave. That failure matters because it turns aging from a demographic fact into a strategic wound. A brand can survive being unfashionable for a while. It cannot survive becoming culturally inherited instead of actively chosen. Once the future customer does not arrive the way the company expected, the pressure stops staying outside and starts finding its way into the boardroom. Younger riders do not owe any brand automatic devotion simply because their fathers once did. The gap widened. If you value honest breakdowns like this, subscribe now. No hype, no shortcuts, just real insights for riders who still care about what these machines stand for and where the industry is heading next. Even inside the company, faith started cracking. The strongest proof often comes when doubt begins spreading inside the house itself. By 2025, the strain around Harley's direction was no longer coming only from longtime riders and outside critics. Reuters reported that board member Jared Dourdeville resigned, citing grave concerns about the state of the company. That kind of language matters because directors are not random internet commenters blowing off steam. They sit close to the numbers, the planning, and the internal mood. When one of them leaves while sounding that alarmed, it gives outside frustration a different kind of legitimacy. It suggests that disappointment was not just nostalgia talking. Something inside the company had begun to crack. A resignation like that does not prove every criticism right, but it changes the tone of the conversation. The problem starts looking less like grumbling from unhappy loyalists and more like a serious internal recognition that the brand had drifted off course. Silence from inside would have made denial easier. A public split made denial harder. Once concern reaches that level, the old comfort line about temporary weakness stops sounding convincing. Hearing that kind of warning from inside the company makes a leadership change look less like a fresh start, and more like the first visible response to a deeper wound. That matters because internal doubt usually appears after private confidence has already been badly damaged. The alarm spread. A leadership change cannot automatically restore a broken bond. Replacing the man at the top can calm headlines, but it does not automatically heal trust. Harley confirmed an active chief executive search in 2025, and Reuters reported that 𝐀𝐿𝐴𝐻𝐻 planned to retire. That is significant, yet longtime riders are not waiting for a new biography or a cleaner corporate portrait. They want proof that the company still understands who built the legend in the first place. Executive turnover can change tone, priorities, and presentation, but it cannot erase years of drift by itself. A new leader may promise focus, discipline, and renewal. Riders have heard polished language before. What they will be watching for is much simpler. Do the motorcycles feel more honest? Does the value feel stronger? Does the company sound like it respects the rider again instead of managing the rider from a distance? That is the real test. Leadership matters, but only if it reaches the machine, the dealer floor, and the rider's confidence. Otherwise, a succession plan is just a corporate event with better lighting. New titles can steady a share price for a season. They cannot, by themselves, restore a bruised relationship. That is why the damage here was never only executive, it was cultural, and culture is always harder to rebuild than a title on the office door. Riders will judge the future less by press releases than by whether the company starts feeling rider-led again. Riders see that. Harley turned a brotherhood into a brand asset. A motorcycle culture becomes powerful when it grows from shared miles, shared hardship, and shared meaning. That is what Harley once had. The company did not invent brotherhood on two wheels, but it became one of its strongest American symbols. Over time, though, that identity started feeling less protected and more managed. The image of the rider, the language of freedom, the look of old-school grit, and the emotional weight of the badge all began to feel like assets being packaged, polished, and sold back to the very people who created them. That is a hard shift for longtime followers to ignore. A culture can survive mistakes, weak years, and awkward experiments. It struggles once the people at the top start treating that culture like a premium surface instead of a living tradition. Harley increasingly framed itself through desirability, premium positioning, and carefully controlled brand language. That may sound smart in a strategy room, but to many riders, it feels like the soul of the thing has been moved into marketing hands. Brotherhood was no longer just something protected. It was something leveraged. That shift drains the earned roughness that once made Harley culture feel believable to road riders. Riders can live with flaws and even forgive slow years. What they do not forgive easily is being taken for granted. Riders can live with flaws, but not being taken for granted. That is why the anger around Harley runs deeper than product complaints. Experienced riders are not fragile customers. They know every machine has quirks. They know no company gets everything right forever. A rider can live with heat, weight, noise, stubbornness, and even the occasional bad decision if he still believes the people behind the badge respect him. What turns frustration into bitterness is the feeling that the company has started assuming loyalty instead of earning it. Respect is the dividing line. Once a rider feels like his patience has been priced in, his pride starts turning against the brand. Harley's problem is not just that some owners became unhappy. It is that too many began feeling handled rather than heard. They saw strategy language replacing rider language. They saw the distance grow between the machine they loved and the company selling it. That is why the disappointment feels personal. It is not only about what was built. It is about the attitude behind what was built. The injury is pride deep because seasoned owners know when a company starts mistaking patience for surrender. Riders can forgive old flaws. They can forgive missed opportunities. What they struggle to forgive is contempt dressed up as confidence. Once disrespect enters the story, what broke was bigger than sales. The company broke the deal that built the legend. Harley's legend was built on an unwritten deal. Riders would give the company loyalty, pride, advocacy, and premium money. In return, Harley would keep building motorcycles and a culture worthy of that devotion. That deal carried the badge for decades. It made owners defend the company in arguments, wear the logo with pride, and stay emotionally invested even when other brands offered more refinement on paper. The company was never required to be perfect. It was required to keep earning the faith. That is where the break happened. Harley leaned on the old covenant while weakening the return. It narrowed itself around profitable segments, chased higher margin comfort, rewarded shareholders, struggled with shrinking shipments, watched its customer base age, and showed signs of internal fracture. None of those issues alone would have destroyed trust. Together, they created one unmistakable message. The company still wanted the old loyalty without consistently delivering the old depth of value. That is the real injury here. Not one bad year, not one bad executive era, a deeper sense that the company kept cashing checks written by a stronger version of itself. That is why the verdict feels moral before it feels financial, and personal before it feels corporate. Which leaves one final question hanging over the whole story. Was Harley robbed of its place, or did it trade it away? Harley was not robbed of its crown. The hardest truth is usually the simplest one. Harley was not merely overrun by changing times, outside pressure, or bad luck. Those forces were real, but they do not tell the whole story. The company made choices. It chose to narrow itself around safer profit centers. It chose to lean harder on premium framing while long-established trust grew thinner. It chose to let the culture feel curated when it once felt lived in. It chose to believe the old emotional bond could survive more strain than it actually could. That is why the decline feels self-inflicted. A crown taken by force inspires sympathy. A crown traded away invites judgment. Harley still has history, powerful machines, and a name that means something to millions. None of that disappears overnight. Yet history alone cannot protect a company from the consequences of forgetting who gave that history its weight. The riders did not abandon the badge first. The company drifted away from the riders who made the badge matter. People sensed the thinning long before annual reports and quarterly earnings finally caught up. That is why the final feeling here is not rage. It is disappointment with memory behind it. The legend was not stolen in the dark. It was slowly thinned out in plain view, one decision at a time. Harley Davidson still carries a name that means something. But for many riders, the bond behind that name has changed. And that is what matters most. This is not just about one company, it is about what happens when a brand forgets who built it in the first place. Now I want to hear from you. Have you felt this shift, or do you think Harley is still on the right path? Share your experience below. If you value honest breakdowns like this, hit like and subscribe, because we are just getting started.